Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever. And today we're talking about the coupling of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring and Petrushka. They actually work very well together on CD because each of them are roughly half an hour long, a little bit more. So you get like 62, 67 minutes on a disc, and it fits perfectly. Now, we've already discussed this coupling, the RCA versions featuring Seiji Ozawa, which are amazing. But this is equally amazing in a very, very different way. The recordings in question are Karel Ancerl and the Czech Philharmonic. Now, this is on Denon, the Denon Classics Best, licensed from Supraphon. This is how you get them together, because the Ancerl Gold edition, if I'm not mistaken, detached them. I think that it did. I'm not sure, but I do know that they're together here, and they sound really good in this particular reissue as well. So they are amazing performances. When were they recorded? 1962 and 63. When the Czech Philharmonic was at the very, very height of its interpretive powers. Ancerl was also, they were all going like gangbusters. It was the golden age of the Czech Philharmonic, to be honest. And Ancerl was a fantastic Stravinsky conductor. And we've already talked about his recording of the Symphony of Psalms, which is the reference recording, and Les Noces, which is incredible. And he did Oedipus Rex, and he did a lot of contemporary Stravinsky stuff, interesting Stravinsky stuff. He did the cantata. He was a fantastic 20th century guy, contemporary music guy, but he really got Stravinsky. And with the Czech Philharmonic at work, what do you get? You get that are, in these performances that's so special. Well, in order to understand that, we need to go back to Stravinsky's own sort of working method, what he did, because Stravinsky as a composer was not really that great at creating his own musical materials. He worked from models. Especially when he was doing Russian music, he worked from models. And it's very, very interesting. If you look at Richard Taruskin's marvelous book on Stravinsky and the Russian style and whatnot, he goes in great depth into how Stravinsky worked with his various models. And in order to do The Rite of Spring, for example, he looked up actual authentic Russian folk song collections, and he took melodic snippets from those. I mean, what makes The Rite of Spring so marvelous? People, the first time you hear it, if you're just a normal classical music person who grew up on like Bach and Beethoven, you might be horrified. But the cool thing about it is that all of the craziness, the dissonance, the extraordinary rhythmic complexity, all arises from the music's basic roots in folk tunes. And those folk tunes are very, very clearly presented. Ya da 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 da. It's a folk tune. It's as simple as can be, right? Ya da 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 da. I mean, they're pure diatonic folk tunes. Ya da 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 da. It's how Stravinsky manipulates them that makes them sound so shocking and so visceral and so primal. It's really marvelous. And what you hear in these performances is that folk element brought out in a way that very few other performances have ever managed to do. It's not something that happens at the expense of the music's shock tactics. I mean, the rhythms are incisive and sharp as ever, and the dissonances are crunching and the balances are terrific. It's all right. It's all exactly what Stravinsky wanted, but the sound of the orchestra itself, that plangent tone to the woodwinds and the tangy, sharp brass and the unblended sonority of the ensemble as a whole really highlights the music's folk ethos. It just does. It does better than any Russian orchestra's ever done, because Russian orchestras generally don't play this stuff. They didn't take to it when Stravinsky wrote it, because he was then living in France and it was written for the Ballet Russe and not for Russian ensembles at home, and he was considered in Russia, especially in his early works, as something of a dilettante because he was a pupil of Rimsky-Korsakov, and he was using all of the tunes that the five, the Kuchka, the Mighty Five, Rimsky and Mussorgsky and those people and Balakirev, they used all the same stuff. If you listen to Petrushka, for example, and then you play, Balakirev's overture on 3 Russian themes, you'll hear ya da 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 ya da 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 da. I mean, the tunes that Stravinsky uses were already being used in Russia in more romantic nationalist pieces, not in a modernist kind of way. And so, partly out of jealousy for his talent, his outsized and extraordinary talent. And Stravinsky was viewed as somebody who was making avant-garde Russian music for the West, but that had very little relevance to what was happening in Russia, and particularly after the revolution, when Marxist, Leninist, socialist realism took over. Well, then, it was all, it wasn't until what, the late 1960s that Stravinsky actually returned to Russia for the first time. So that was the story in Russia. So in order to get that Eastern European Slavic feel, which is so much a part of his soul, so much a part of the music, you've got to hear a real Eastern European orchestra. The Czech Philharmonic at this period was the greatest of them all. And I make no exceptions for like Moravinsky and Leningrad. Yeah, they could be good in certain things, but they weren't really making records, and their live things were, catch as catch can, and then Melodia sonics were horrible. So here you get good sound. Actually, it's very good sound in stereo. Amazing performances of these 2 stunning ballets. And they are unquestionably, for all these reasons, among the greatest recordings ever. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.